In this week's screencast, we look over assessment and development centres, and we're focusing particularly on how you might design the mock assessment centre which you're going to run next semester. So firstly, we considered the stages of the assessment process, and then we looked at some of the practicalities of the delivery on the day. Take a few moments to work out how many assessors you think are needed for this particular timetable to work. What have you come up with? Now, whatever answer you've come up with, you now need to think about scaling this up, because here we're looking at 6 participants, and although that's quite typical to have 6 to 8 participants in an assessment centre, what you'll be delivering is on a much larger scale, because you're going to be having around 50 participants in your activity. So you need to think how you can best employ the people who are available to act as assessors, and you also need to think about the skills each individual person wants to develop in the assessment centre. So some of you might find it more useful to be an interviewer, some of you might find it more useful to take on an organisational role, somebody else might particularly want to be an observer of a group task, and you need to think about those things when you're actually designing what you're doing and thinking about who's going to go and do what. The other thing we talked about was the way in which sometimes it appears that exercises seem to be predictive rather than competencies, so that participants receive the same score for different competencies in the same exercise. So take a minute to reflect on why this might occur. How might we mitigate this effect? And is this going to occur in your own assessment centre when you design it? How will you deal with this issue in your own assessment centre? So let's have a think about the actual overall process. So first of all, you need to start by thinking about what to measure. And when you're thinking about what to measure, budget and time are, need to be very much an upfront conversation. If you think you might need resources, we need to have that discussion early on. And really, this is about choosing the job description you're going to use in this mock assessment activity, choosing the job description you're going to use, and then use that to establish the criteria you're going to assess against. And then once you've done that, you need to agree that with me, because in this exercise I am acting as the client. So your nominated representative should liaise with me at the beginning of this process and throughout the design process and the delivery process. I will be there on the day, and I'll be sort of there ready to deal with any issues that might arise. But what my aim is to act purely as a client and only be there in case of emergencies, so that I'd like you to take full responsibility for running, designing, running, delivering and feeding back from this activity. But this is the stage at which you look at the behaviours and competencies and how they might begin to inform the design of the process. Setting up the agreement with the client involves a lot of different things. It means, being in constant communication, but also talking about what the options are available based on the resource and time constraints. Now, I've given you details of the resource constraints in terms of the rooms, and you already know how many people you have in your group, and you have a rough idea about how many candidates, participants that you possibly have. But you also need to talk about the way who's responsible for the different things and who might deliver different things. You then move on to the design process of the assessment centre or development centre, and I keep saying assessment centre, but obviously this process is the same whether it's an assessment centre or a development centre. In this context, although we're attempting to simulate an assessment centre because that's where the learning is for the undergraduate students, actually it really genuinely is a development centre, because what we want them to gain from it is some learning that will inform their employability and help them to decide what competence or what transferable skills they need to develop over time. So the designing stage practically, you need to think about the steps that you need to take, and here, here they are really. We've pre-decided the venue for you, and that's been booked already, and so you know what rooms you have available, but you need to think about how you're going to use that space, and you need to think about all these other stages of the design process, selecting or designing the exercises. You might develop some yourself, designing the rating forms that you're going to use and the assessment matrix, the very practicalities of putting the timetable together, and then also moving on to thinking about training the assessors. So training the assessors for you might mean something specific, and that is doing moderation on your assessment. So ensuring that you're all marking at the same level and observing the same things. The way in which I would encourage you to do this is to pilot any exercises that you're going to do using other people as participants. Have a go at making observations, compare what observations you make against the same people, and compare those and see how you get on. If you need some physical space in order to do that, you can book group rooms either in the Study Skills Centre, which is at 301 Glossop Road, as well as in the Information Commons, so either of those will be available to you. And if you need bigger space, then get in touch with me, and I'll attempt to book you something in another building. So as part of this training process, you need to think about the way in which you're going to assess, and this is a very good way of considering that, thinking about observing, recording, classifying, and then evaluating the behaviours which you see. If you've developed good rating scales with good indicators on them, that should be much easier for you, and that could be something that's a smaller subset of you go away and work on. So you need to think about the ratings, and you need to think about what the ratings mean, so that it's easy to use these rating scales. When you're deciding what to include, have a think about what other people include, but that in no way suggests that you should be using those particular things, but it might give you some ideas of the type of things. And if you're looking for specific exercises, again, ask me. I might have some off the peg that you can use, or I might have something that you can work from, or you might have to develop some yourself. So the next stage is the actual delivery of the activities. Is the actually getting on with it and on the day. And there I think you need to think about are the practicalities of the day for the participants. So what I would do is have a go at doing a participant journey map. By that I mean act as if you were one of the participants. Where would you physically arrive? What information do you need to know ahead of time? When do you need to know that information ahead of time? What might your concerns be? Where would you physically go when you walk in the door? Is somebody going to greet you? How do you find the toilet? Fire processes. It's about actually tracking somebody as they go through that process, and you need to think about that in relation to different potential participants. Now, I don't believe that we have any participants who are either wheelchair users or have physical disabilities which are going to impact them in attendance at this activity. If I find out that that is the case, obviously I will inform you as soon as I know, but I would like you to reflect on how you would deal with those issues were they to arise in your reflections that you're going to write up for your applying psychology module. Reflecting on those contingencies, because although in an ideal world we'd know those things ahead of time, not all participants would actually inform us. And then finally, you need to think about the feedback processes that you're going to be using. When are you going to feed back to these individual clients? What are you going to be feeding back to them? And how will that happen? Because again, you need to think about that ahead of time. You're going to be doing it on the day. I would advise you not to. That's very tricky because it's very time consuming to get the information together. Are you going to do it in a written format and send them a little report about yourself that has been done by previous groups? Are you going to have a go at doing it doing a verbal feedback, and using a lecture slot to do that in? If so, does that physically fit in time wise with you, and who's going to actually do that feedback? So have a think about that. And also what I'd like you to think about is, what is the purpose of this task? So this is development centre really, rather than an assessment centre, although we're trying to obviously simulate an assessment centre. So you need to think about how you write that feedback up so that it's developmental and positive for the participants, and also so that everybody gets a go at providing that feedback as well, because that is a very different skill to others you might have developed in other forms of recruitment and selection processes, and one that I think will be highly beneficial for you to practice. Okay, so I haven't covered all of the things that we covered in the lecture, because I've obviously tried to slant this screencast in terms of the assessment centre activity, but I hope that's a useful summary for you of the things that we covered.